Hello and welcome to Unpacking Articles. My name is Florencia Henshaw. I have a PhD in Second Language Acquisition from the great University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And the article we're going to be unpacking today is something that I've always wondered. Does it help when I turn on the captions for students? Is it better if I use subtitles? The article is called Watching Subtitled Films Can Help Learning Foreign Languages. And this study is comparing learning gains from watching a subtitled video, that means with the translation, versus with captions, which would be a transcription of what the person is saying. Previous research in this area has shown conflicting results. On the one hand, some studies show essentially no difference in vocab learning or plot comprehension. Both conditions seem to help. And other studies have shown that captions may actually be better than subtitles. In this particular research, the participants were 60 college students learning English. The study took place in Spain. The students were at a B2 level, which in the ACTFL proficiency scale would be an intermediate high, advanced low. And they watched one episode of Downton Abbey that was only an hour and 8 minutes. 20 students were in a group that watched it with Spanish subtitles, so it was translated. Another group of 20 students watched the same episode with English captions, so a transcription of what people were saying. And a third group of also 20 students watched it without anything, so without subtitles, without captions. The assessment measures how learning was assessed was with a classic pre-test, post-test design. So before watching the video, students did a listening test, which was essentially fill in the blanks. So they listened to somebody and they had to write the word that they heard in the blank. A vocabulary test, which consisted of matching words and definitions. And for the post-test, they also had to do plot comprehension questions to make sure that they had understood what happened in the episode. So if we look at changes from pre-test to post-test on the vocab and the listening tests, captions and nothing, they both increased from pre-test to post-test. The subtitles group, the one that watched it with a translation, there was no change at all in the score for listening, and there was actually a decrease on the vocab test. Now let's look at a group comparison. For the listening, the captions did better than having nothing at all, and nothing at all did better than subtitles. For the vocab test, again, captions did better than nothing, and nothing did better than subtitles. But the authors do point out that this difference was not significant. The difference for the listening test, yes, captions did significantly better. And finally, in terms of the plot comprehension, subtitles was the one that did the best. So subtitles did better than captions, and captions did better than nothing. And so why? What could explain these results? Well, first, for the listening test, which you could argue is like ear training, right? You listen to somebody, can you recognize a word within a sentence? I think it makes sense that captions helped because captions allowed learners to be listening to the audio and also to see a transcription of it, which really helps you recognize words. The subtitles group, on the other hand, it was too much competition for attentional resources. They were listening to something in English, reading something in Spanish, and then also having to make sense of what was going on. Now, in terms of vocab, why was it that no group did significantly better than another group? The main reason is that the items were relatively obscure. They were not common words. They were very specific to this particular TV series, which is about aristocrats. And so the more obscure an item is in meaning, probably the more difficult it's going to be in terms of incidental, one-time exposure, figuring out what that means. The translation group, so the group that had the subtitles, it wasn't a word-for-word translation. And also, when someone is talking and you're reading the text pretty quickly, it is hard to make that match between the word and its meaning. Now, what about plot comprehension? This is probably the easiest, right? Of course, subtitles help you understand. Now, the interesting thing is that the captions group did not miss out on things. And this is the quote that summarizes it best. It is remarkably positive that English subtitles, meaning captions, did not add sufficient cognitive load as to disrupt overall plot comprehension due to dual task costs, as plot comprehension with English subtitles still outperformed plot comprehension without subtitles. And so the bottom line for me is captions for the win. The students were able to do better in terms of ear training. Vocab, well, that was a toss-up between all of them, but captions didn't do any worse. And same with comprehension. They were still able to understand what was happening, meaning it helped more than nothing at all. And this all, to me, goes back to bimodal input, which we explored in another article. Having access to input, both visually and orally at the same time, might be facilitative of language development. In this particular study, at least, we know that it helped students in terms of ear training, which we could say is the first step towards listening comprehension, or at least an important component of listening comprehension. Of course, the study is not perfect, and there is no perfect study. The limitations that it has can certainly be addressed in future studies, and I think that it would be wonderful for future studies to address some of these lingering questions. The first one is, what about more episodes? They only watch one episode, so it is pretty limited in that respect. What if we did a study where it is maybe throughout the whole year or throughout the whole semester that the students are watching an episode a week, for example? What about other genres? What if students watched nonfiction? Or even if it's fiction, what if it's a story with a more relatable, everyday plot line? Could we maybe see some differences in terms of vocabulary learning? Another question that we need to address is, of course, what about lower level learners? These learners were intermediate, high, advanced, low. That's pretty high. So what happens with novice learners? What about intermediate learners? Do we do captions? Do we do translations? What helps them best? And of course, we need to be mindful of differences across languages. What about languages that don't share the same script, the same alphabet? Would it help to have captions? Would it help to have subtitles? And speaking of languages, we do need to consider whose language are we using for the subtitles, for the translation into what language? Because our learners may not all share the same first language. And so how do we choose which translation to offer if we're going to be using subtitles? And because of some of these lingering questions, we need to extrapolate with care. I think this is one situation in which definitely one size does not fit all, or does not even fit one. What do I mean by that? First, for some learners, captions might indeed be more helpful than subtitles. But for other learners, the captions might actually be distracting or might be competing for attentional resources to be reading and listening at the same time. And I think that one size doesn't fit one, because instead of viewing it as an all or nothing choice or as a binary choice between subtitles and captions, what if we incorporate multiple strategies? What if we do some previewing activities where there are some translations and where we're helping the learners understand what's happening? And then what if we watch part of the episode with captions and maybe watch it again without captions? In other words, how can we combine these strategies so that learners benefit the most? That's just my take on it. As usual, I encourage you to read the article for yourself and draw your own conclusions. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time.